Hello and welcome to a special edition of PRWeek's Beyond the Noise podcast. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK. This is a recording of a session at PRWeek's Crisis Communications Summit held on 27th of June in London. It's a Q&A with Jonny Fordham. He is the head of communications at Premiership Rugby. In this session, Jonny discusses how he and his colleagues cope with recent crises at the Rugby League, not least the administration of 3 clubs last year, reports of racism in rugby, and some players leaving for a rival league in France. There is some really good advice here about flipping the narrative, resetting relationships with journalists, and combating misinformation. Speaking to Jonny is Lee Cain, the founder of Charlesbye and former comms director at 10 Downing Street, who is our host for the day. We hope you enjoy the session.
So, just as a sort of introductory point, I'd like to sort of introduce yourself and your career and sort of tell us where it all began with you at Premiership Rugby and the particular challenge we're going to discuss.
Yeah, so much like yourself, I'm a former hard-working Red Top newspaper journalist. I covered rugby for the Sun newspaper, and after that I went and joined CSM, where I was kind of looking after the communications for brands, for our athletes, in terms of rugby players, in terms of cricketers. And then I got a call from Premiership Rugby asking if I'd like to come back to rugby. And just at the time, they had just come out of a Westminster inquiry. 2 clubs had gone bankrupt, and I thought, do I need this, or is this the kind of good time to get in? I thought, yeah, this is a good time to get in. Things can't be any worse than this. So
things can always get worse. That's all good.
Things can definitely always get worse. So I decided to take the leap back into rugby full time, and on day one, I sat down with my chief exec for breakfast, and he said to me, "Hey, look, I need to tell you a couple of things." So cool. So getting a pay rise already, something maybe, I'm not too sure. And he said that there was fears that we might have another club who were in financial troubles. There was a racism scandal about to come out, and also potentially a lot of our players in our league were about to leave our league to go play for one of our rival leagues in France. So I was like, okay, great. So I was like, tell me, like, when's it going to happen? Like, how much time have I got to prepare? Luckily, there was enough time to kind of get my feet under the table and prepare. But yeah, it's been a crazy roller coaster ride from a really busy start. And I thought that it would be a bit more seasonal with being sport, but absolutely not. It's just full on 24/7. Yeah.
So what did you mentioned those sort of initial sort of, swarm of crises that we're sort of moving forward with. What did you do to deal with those initially? What was the first steps?
Yeah, so with the 2 clubs having already gone bankrupt, there was obviously a lot of pressure on the league. There was a lot of feeling that people felt that we should have bailed them out. But the way that the Premiership Rugby works is that basically we're just like Premier League football. We sell a TV deal and we sell sponsorship. So we're actually owned by the club. So we couldn't go out and buy another club. 1, we didn't have the money. 2, it just wasn't possible. So we had to make that pretty clear that we weren't a bank. Devastating what happened, but there was just nothing we could do within our control. The other challenge
was there an understanding of that as well. Did people expect?
Loosely, that was more kind of the social media rhetoric in the coverage that we got. It was generally fair, but there was always a kind of the comment pieces would always question this, and obviously people were talking about it online, so it was going to drive hits. So that got picked up. But what I discovered was that we needed to get on top of the story in terms of every single press conference for all our other 11 clubs, as it was at the time. They would be asked about these other clubs. They would be asked how financially stable was their club. So I had to put together messaging for 11 clubs, both for the directors of rugby, for the owners, for the chief execs, and try and get everyone back on the same page, because we were stuck in this kind of snowball effect of just keep on talking about the same thing. Whereas at the same time, the league itself was absolutely flying. So the season that I came in, we had the record number of tries. We had some amazing breakthrough stars of the league. Yet everyone was talking about something that had happened kind of 6 months before. So we just had to get out of that routine of adding fuel to the fire. Every opportunity, like the clubs and people working there would just run to it. So it was about, putting your foot on the ball and saying, hey, look, we need to start moving forwards now, not kind of living in the past. So sending that weekly messaging and kind of just staying on top of that. The other thing that I really made a concerted effort of was going and seeing everyone as well. Spending time with them. It's all well and good sending an email on a Monday or Tuesday morning, but then you've got to follow it up and just remind them, because some of them were like, hey, great, thanks for that. Others were like, oh, I haven't seen it. That sounds really useful. Then they would look at it and kind of, we started to get a bit of clarity in terms of where we wanted to go, and also the kind of that uniform voice of the league. It was, everyone kind of pulling together. It was obviously a big time of crisis for the sport. And I think once everyone started to realise, actually, collectively, that it was okay and things were going okay, and it was okay to talk about that as well. We didn't have to live in the past.
How easy was it to get so many different stakeholders on board with one message? Because I assume they've all got the very independent sort of fiefdoms and views, and to try and build that into one narrative must be quite hard.
Yeah, it is, because obviously you've got 10, 11 different clubs. You've got owners of these clubs who are generally very successful business people who are, not used to people directly or indirectly kind of trying to steer them in one direction that they might not necessarily want to be. So it took a lot of work. I think that the great thing about it was that it wasn't just me doing it. So my chief exec, who's brilliant, and he would always be kind of banging the drum as well. So it was about that kind of collective voice, and also the club media officers as well. Having a tight relationship with them as well was really important, because they didn't want to see their clubs kind of in stress. They looked at us as a league at the time as well, and they were just saying to us, like, what do we do and what do we say? And it was just like a simple framework that we put together and said, look, let's just focus on this. And if everyone's happy and everyone can kind of just say the good things about, the record number of tries, and, let's start looking up. And once it's one person does it, and the others kind of cotton on. So it's like when you watch Sky Sports News on a Thursday or Friday, when they go around the Premier League clubs and they might ask every single person the same question. If you can kind of make sure the answer's pretty much the same, then you've got a strong message there. So that would be the ideal.
How long was it till you start to see the fruits of that within the media? Because from my own experience, the last thing they want is everybody to be on message. The story comes when you can break that and create friction points.
Yeah. So it was important for us to also kind of almost call everyone in, and so I joined in the March. Like I say, the third and final club, London Irish, was looking precarious at that stage, and it was until the April where players and staff weren't paid their wages that month, and that was the kind of alarm bell moment that was publicly known. So all that time we'd been preparing everything and testing everything, and one of the things that we did was we brought everyone in-house. We said, look, we want to bring you all into our offices. We sat in a room for about 2-3 hours with all the main rugby media, and we presented lots of business cases in terms of the financials, why it was good for players to be playing in England. We shared all that with the RFU as well. And actually what we found was, I was a bit worried, because I thought at the end it would be an absolute frenzy of questions, because we were doing something we'd never done before as a league. We just opened up the books and said, this is what the situation is. And actually, it was almost like a silence at the end, not because they were bored, I hope, but because they were quite kind of shocked in the amount of detail that we'd gone into with them that they'd never had before. So their level of understanding all of a sudden was actually, oh, whoa, okay, we can see what your challenges are here. And, we can see that this isn't your fault, that's not the club's fault, So everything that they were talking about, it gave that bit of clarity. And we saw after that things settled down a bit. So when it came to actually the end of the season, our final last year had our lowest ever attendance because of the 3 clubs that had gone bankrupt, the general apathy of the sport, and we had 62,000 people there. And that was a kind of line in the sand to then come fast forward to this year, where we had a record sellout, because what we'd managed to do was that we'd flipped the narrative, and we talked about the rebuild, So once you start talking about the rebuild, we managed to bring people on that journey with us, and they wanted to be part of it. And it was just about kind of dangling out little bits of information at certain times. You know, I'm always very open when a journalist comes to me. I'd like to give them as much detail as I can, just so that they can write the best story they can as well. Because there was a lot of misinformation going out there from a lot of different sources that you don't know about, you can't waste your time on. But you also can't go around correcting everything. But I found that the more open and honest we were, the better our coverage started to become. And also the clubs then see that. And it kind of empowers them a little bit more to kind of be a bit more comfortable. And you know, when the players, there's 500 odd players, you know, every time they put a microphone in front of their face, or the directors of rugby or the owners, you know, they can start getting back on the front foot. There's a bit more confidence in it all.
And did you find from your previous career, you know, the sort of poacher turned gamekeeper, did that help inform the strategy that you ended up pursuing?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, I was amazed when I came into Premiership Rugby in the amount of, we have a world of stats and information on so many different things. And I was like, wow, this is like a candy shop for a journalist, because there's so many good things that this league was doing, that our league is doing. And I was like, we should tell people about this, and we should talk about that. And to start with, there was a lot of, oh no, we wouldn't do that because this is rugby. That's not how we do it. So there was a lot of kind of prodding and poking people that I had to do to get them to go, actually, you know what, like, we have got some really good stories here. And it's, you know, we're starting to see that. We do a really big kind of in-depth report on referees and, you know, players' reactions to refereeing decisions. So a lot of people will say that, look at the theatrics in football, and then they compare it to rugby. Well, there's a little bit of that creeping in rugby. So we do this big report and this big study, and we'll probably work with someone who's interested in that to kind of get that information out, because it just puts us on that front foot of being a leader in our sport. Whereas before, I have it on my phone, I have a picture of a Daily Mail headline, which just says, no jeopardy, no clue, in huge 64-point font. That was about this time last year that came out. And I've still got that. And I look at it from time to time and go, that's my kind of like, you know, we need to make sure that we do present ourselves as that kind of leader in the sport, which we weren't filling that space, and we were kind of being routinely picked off by journalists who were more than happy to call us out on things because we weren't being honest and we weren't being open with a lot of things that we did.
And your personal relationship with journalists, was it what you expected being on the other side of the fence? Did it help, or did they expect more from you?
I think there's definitely some people who thought, right, we have one of our own. It was like it was an inside job all of a sudden. I think they thought that, right, he's in there and it's going to be so easy because he's going to tell us everything and give us everything that we want. And it wasn't like that. So it's been an interesting dynamic with some of them, because I think some people will phone up kind of with a tiny little tidbit and will want me to then just give everything, which I wouldn't give everything. Like if they came to me with the information, I'll help. But I think there was that expectation that he's still a journalist, almost like this is like I've gone in undercover, because these are guys that I spent 7-8 years of my life with, going around the world covering a sport, having the most amazing times, sharing, you know, great memories, and we know each other really well. I think they all of a sudden thought that it was kind of like open season and there would be stories everywhere for everyone to feast on.
How did you go about resetting those relationships again?
Yeah. I think it was the longer that I was in, I have been in the position, the more they've understood the way that I'll be working with them. Tried to make sure I still spend a lot of time with them as much as I can. But you've also got to, I don't know, it's probably like when a sportsman becomes a manager, right? They step back a little bit, don't they? So it's almost like that. You kind of have to step back a little bit. Like I say, I think that spending time with them is really important still. It takes up a lot of time to do that. I go to a lot of games and will spend as much time as I need to in the press room beforehand, afterwards. And again, actually, that's where...
Is that sort of just casual? Is that huddles, and how do you tend to brief?
Yeah, pretty casual, to be fair. It's a very small pack, so there's not too many kind of chats in the corner. It's more... I did used to see that with a lot of people kind of when I was covering it. Try not to do that because it becomes so obvious because there's such a small group of journalists. So I prefer to do it, one-on-one rather than when there's other people in the room. So I find that the more time that I spend with them now, the better that relationship stays. But also, I realised a few months ago I hadn't been to a few games for a bit, and I felt like I was kind of slipping out of touch a little bit. So I had to I need to go put that work in, because I don't think anything beats that face-to-face contact. I mean, I came to this conference a couple of years ago, and there was a lady from Starling Bank who talked about how once a month she would make time to spend with somebody who was very critical of them, the business, etc. And that's one thing that I'm going to try and tap into this year as well, because I've spent a lot of time with the people who are pretty fair and honest with us. The ones who tend to kind of write quite hard on us, I don't spend any time with really. And that's more because I don't see them as much. But I think that's really important to get on the front foot.
It's also easily done, isn't it? The people who they're not used to engaging as much, and you're not used to engaging. I remember when working with Michael Gove, and one of the first things he did when he went into DEFRA was the same thing. He sat down with people like Client Earth and things who were very, very critical. They give him so much more leeway just because he'd give them a fair hearing and had that conversation. Yeah. So it can really transform relationships.
Yeah, massively. And obviously in rugby, one of the big kind of continuous issues is concussion and the kind of perception of that. And one of the things that we've done is we've sat down with a lot of the lobby groups who are very much backing the legal cases and everything going on. And again, it's the same kind of thing. We present all the information and we give our kind of our view on things. And then when you ask them what they think about it, they're just so stunned that they're getting all this access or information. They have nothing to say, so their kind of approach starts to soften a bit on you. Because there's other people in the sport who definitely won't be sitting down with anyone like that.
So you've sort of been on this journey from, when it was probably at one of its lowest points to the success that the league's enjoying at the moment. What would be the sort of 3 sort of key points that you would sort of look at to advise anyone else facing a sort of similar crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think try and be as honest as you can. I think that's a lot of things that people have been talking about today. There's obviously certain things you can and can't say, but we are always as honest as we can be. So it's the honesty. It's the preparation for me as well. I was fortunate enough that when I joined the business, I had a good kind of 2 months or so to get myself ready and prepared for if the worst case scenario were to happen and we were to lose another club. We'd obviously had the previous 2 to look at and kind of say, right, what went well there, what didn't. But the preparation was key. We talked about it so much internally, and we talked about it with other stakeholders that when the news came, as shocking as it was, as bad as it was, people were understanding of the challenges that everyone faced, and it was landed a lot softer. And the other thing, again, is probably just being accessible. I'd like to think that our exec are very, very much accessible. People will routinely want to speak to our chief exec or other people in the organisation, and if we can, we'll definitely facilitate these things, because even if it's an off-the-record briefing or if they want to do something on the record, we're pretty accessible. And what we also spoke about was that we couldn't just choose when to be accessible as well. If we wanted to be a business and a league and an organisation that showed leadership in our sport, we couldn't hide away when things got tough. That would have been an easy thing to do, just to hide away when we had that really bad, well, not really bad, but the lower attendance last season. It would have been easy for us to hide away. But we came out and we spoke about that. We spoke about London Irish. We spoke about all these things. And yeah, I think that's really helped us on that journey to selling out in record time, because all of a sudden we're open and we're here and we're communicating to people and telling our own story. I think it's really important that we tell our story and that others don't tell what they think is our story.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's so often the case, isn't it? That sort of vacuum will be filled one way or another. And it's either you're telling your story to people or they're going to tell it for you.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of Beyond the Noise. Do please leave a review wherever you access your podcasts. Thanks, of course, to Jonny and to Lee, and we hope you join us next time. Goodbye.